Hello, everyone. I am so excited. I've got an old friend, Kevin Shurtleff. He's a tenured professor at Utah Valley University on with us today. We're going to be talking about an exciting remediation for algal blooms that are affecting not only uh, shorelines all along the East Coast in the southeastern part of the United States, but on other bodies of water around the country. So stick around. You don't want to miss this episode.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
This episode is made possible via the support of our sponsors, including Johnson & Johnson's Caring Crowd. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you and grateful that you would take the time to be with us on the show. It's really interesting what you've got. Tell us a little bit about your idea and where it came from.
So at the end of summer of 2016, we had a large algal bloom down here on Utah Lake. I had done some work at the Utah State University Research Foundation on algal biofuels. And I thought, after that bloom, I thought there's something needs to be done here. And I tried to apply some of my experience and what I knew about algae in order to find a solution to the problem, to see if we could prevent these harmful algal blooms.
Now, you have a background in, I think of it as energy. How would you describe your expertise?
Yeah, so most of my career, I've been out in industry for 25 years doing entrepreneurial energy type ventures, fuel cell companies. I had an enhanced oil recovery company. So I'm really most interested in energy, renewable energy production. My research here at Utah Valley University is about energy production, renewable energy production, wind, solar, river power. And so I'm really an energy person. However, when I saw this algal bloom happen on Utah Lake, I thought maybe I can apply some of this stuff in order to harvest the algae. And ultimately, I want to turn it into energy. Although, to be honest, the focus of this research is to harvest the algae, remove the algae, prevent or end the algal blooms. And then we can do lots of things with the algae once it's harvested.
So tell us about your technology. I'm picturing a boat scooping up all the algae and then converting the algae to energy. How would you describe it?
Yeah, well, that's actually a pretty good brief description. I'll add a few details here.
Okay.
So with my experience when we were trying to grow algae for biofuels, the real issue still in that industry is dewatering the algae. In other words, once you grow the algae, which is a water plant, once you grow it in the water, removing it from the water is still a challenge and it's quite expensive. And that's really what we need to do to solve this algal bloom problem, is to try and remove the water or the algae directly from the water, from the lake water. So that's how we approached it. So we actually started with my students in the spring of 2017. I had 6 students and we started testing different ways for removing the algae from water. We actually had to set up our own algae growth system because during the time we started, there weren't any algal blooms on Utah Lake. So we actually are growing our own cyanobacteria in order to harvest it later. And then we tried 5, 6, actually ended up being 7 different ways to harvest the algae. 5 of those ways didn't work. Which is how science goes. But right. The last 2 we tried, we developed what we call our continuously swept diatomaceous earth filter. And the other one we finally found that works is what's called a plate and frame filter press. So essentially the idea is we have a water treatment system that's floating on a large barge. We can load that barge into the lake or any body of water. We head over to where the algae concentrations are the highest. We lower a suction boom into the water, and we really just suck the water, take it through our filtration system, filter out the algae, and then we basically pour the water back into the lake, much cleaner now.
Yeah, so it's with most of the algae removed from it. Now,
Right.
Utah Lake, and I want to be clear about this for people who have vague familiarity with Utah, they may even be confusing Utah Lake with the Great Salt Lake. And they're very different bodies of water, right?
Absolutely. The Great Salt Lake, of course, is very salty. Utah Lake is a large freshwater body of water.
So we're having algal blooms on Utah Lake at times, but Florida along the East Coast and other states along the East Coast of the United States have had that problem as well. But that's saltwater. Is there any difference in the way your technology would work in fresh or salt water?
Well, that's actually a really great question because we did try a technology that would work in freshwater. It's called electrostatic precipitation. We would separate the algae out with an electric charge. That would work on fresh bodies of water, but it would not work in the ocean because the ocean has salt and that conducts electricity, so it just wouldn't work. So we actually decided to put that one on hold so that we could focus on ones that would work in either freshwater or salty water.
I see.
Those two technologies that work, that's where we ended up.
What is algae and how do you convert it to energy?
So algae is a water plant. The primary type of algae is actually not algae. It's a cyanobacteria. It's blue-green algae. We call it blue-green algae, but it's a cyanobacteria, which means it's a photosynthetic bacteria. It's still a water plant. It's a bacteria that can use sunshine to grow. So these are really water plants. They need sunshine. They need nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, just like any other plant would require. And then they need carbon dioxide because plants, photosynthesis converts carbon dioxide to sugars or starches or things that the water plants or bacteria need in order to divide and grow. And then you need lots of sunshine, which is really the energy source for photosynthesis. So that's where the algal blooms come from, is because there's lots of sunshine, there's lots of CO2, there's lots of nutrients in the water, and then also growth rates are exponentially related to temperature. So reaction rates increase, they double for every 10 degrees C. So when the water's warm, that's when you see the algal blooms. And so as the water gets warmer and warmer earlier and early in the year, then we get larger and larger and longer algal blooms. So once the algae grows, or the cyanobacteria grows and reproduces, it gets to very high concentrations. It starts blocking the light from other algal cells for other algal cells. And what that means is the algae start to die because they don't get sunshine. And it's when they die that they release these toxins, the cyanobacteria release toxins, that are dangerous to humans and to dogs and to animals. So our goal is to harvest them while they're still alive and never let them get to the high enough concentrations where they begin to die. And so once we harvest them, we've really pulled the nutrients out of the ground, out of the water. If they die, they just settle to the bottom and decompose, and those nutrients are released again. So we can actually reduce the amount of nutrients in the water. And then the other thing is they've basically captured sunshine to make their bodies, and they become essentially a biomass fuel, much like wood chips or leaves or grass. They become a source of biomass, which we can then convert into electricity. And there's lots of ways to do that. The one that we prefer is called gasification. And it's a partial combustion where we convert the biomass into a flammable gas, hydrogen and carbon monoxide, which then can be taken directly into an internal combustion engine to generate electricity. So that's what we favor, but there are other ways that you could do it as well.
Interesting. It's just a fascinating process. I'm curious, you know, I look at PhDs sometimes as caricatures of themselves and assume they know everything. And so if I go too far afield from your area of expertise, forgive me and just explain that. But I'm curious about why we seem to be seeing an increase in algal blooms in recent years. Not that we never had them before, but there does seem to be a trend. Maybe you can confirm my perception of the trend and explain why we're seeing that increase.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was a young man, 16-year-old, that was a long time ago, I used to water ski on Utah Lake. And when we get over there by Provo Bay, the water was green. There were definitely algal blooms back in the day. So there is a lot of debate about what is causing the algal blooms. Some people think it's because we put so many nutrients into Utah Lake or other bodies of water. These are from agricultural runoff, from fertilizers. These are processed human waste, has a lot of nutrients in it, nitrogen and phosphorus, fertilizer. So a lot of people think it's that. There are studies going on to try to determine what causes it. I was trying to avoid all the politics of, what's causing it. And I just said, look, if it's there, I can go out and collect it. It removes the nutrients from the water, and I can potentially convert the algae into energy or electricity. I do have an opinion about it, however. Clearly, as part of my, teaching responsibilities, I teach an energy use on Earth class, and we discuss global climate change or global warming due to the fact that we're producing a lot of carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels. I'm a believer in that. I think it's man-made, and so it's definitely an issue. And I actually believe that because we are, it's an interesting side note is fossil fuels, they're really just ancient cyanobacteria that got buried, right? So back in the end of the Triassic, beginning of the Jurassic period, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere was something like 3,000 parts per million. Today, we're pushing 400 parts per million. And so the way that nature took care of all that excess CO2 is they had massive algal blooms back in the day when it was really warm, when Canada was a tropical region. We had these huge algal blooms, and that algae, when it died and settled to the bottom, instead of decomposing, it got buried. So there was no oxygen to decompose it. And that's what we now pump out of the ground as oil. Over the years of pressure and temperature, it gets converted to crude oil. So we're really burning ancient algae. And that means that nature, once again, is saying, oh, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is going up. Therefore, what will I do to solve it? I'll have more algal blooms, right? It's warmer. So that's beneficial to algal blooms. There's more CO2 in the atmosphere. That benefits the algal blooms. So really, it's nature's way of dealing with it is to create these algal blooms. And I really think it's related to global climate change.
Yeah, fascinating information. Kevin, you've done some really cool things in your career. What are you most proud of having accomplished?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I unfortunately, it's not related to chemistry. I'm most proud of my family, to be honest. I have 5 children. My first wife passed away, and I remarried. And so I now have 7 children. They're all adults, and I'm probably most proud of that. I have 8 grandchildren, which as a grandfather, I love being a grandfather. It's my favorite thing. So that was my greatest accomplishment. When it comes to chemistry, I'm hoping that projects like this that have a large impact and can really make a difference. I mean, I would love to see Utah Lake become the more pristine, beautiful lake that it used to be. And so that all of us who live here around it can enjoy it. I'd also like to see this technology, this algae harvesting technology, go global. I would like to help out the Floridians. Red tide, which is off the coast of Florida, we could harvest it with our technology. We could remove that algae. Lake Okeechobee, we could, harvest the algae out of that and make it a nicer lake. Lake Erie, I mean, there are many lakes around the United States that could benefit from this, and there's lakes worldwide that we can use this to capture that algae instead of letting it maybe get converted into oil, a million years from now. We can actually capture it now and use it as an energy source. And by the way, because it's capturing CO2 from burned ancient algae, it's actually a carbon neutral energy production source. So, if we can make this happen, I would be more than happy. I would be extremely happy and excited that we can make that kind of an impact on a global, solving a global problem.
That's great. Well, Kevin, what's the most important lesson you've learned over your career?
There's always going to be failures. That's one of my most important lessons. I mean, in pretty much any successful person has to go through a lot of failures, and science is no different. It's trial and error. I teach my students that, science is a process of trial and error. We try something, we compare it to what our hypothesis was, and if it didn't work, then we change our hypothesis and we do more experiments. So it really is a trial and error process, and we have to be patient with that. The fact that I think personally, I feel that our society is not very tolerant of failure, even though there's always failures before you find success.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that.
Yeah.
Kevin, you have been pursuing renewable energy as a focus of your career for as long as I've known you, 15 years. Why is that so important to you?
Well, energy, cheap, clean energy is the foundation of economic growth. It's the economic engine. The United States, we would not have the quality of life that we have today if it wasn't for the fact that we had cheap energy. We now realize that was in the form of fossil fuels, and we were emitting lots of CO2. But energy is critical to our way of life and our standard of living. So if we can make cheap, renewable, clean energy that doesn't have an impact on the environment that some of the other energy sources have in the past, then we can have, once again, another global impact here. We can help some of these developing countries reach the standard of living that we enjoy. But it's going to require cheap, plentiful, clean energy. And so that's why I've done renewable energy research for so many years. I've done hydrogen fuel cells. Currently I'm working on a battery project for load leveling so that we can have, more stable power supplies. When we use solar energy or wind energy, which are variable, we can have battery backup. I've done wind and solar and river power for the indigenous people of Haiti up in the mountains. We had a river power project where we built a paddle wheel system that would generate electricity for the local community. So it's just, the bottom line is cheap energy is extremely important for economic growth and for quality of life.
Fantastic. Kevin, what is your superpower?
What is my superpower? I would say my superpower is, you caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting a question like that. But if I had a superpower, it would be the fact that I think I'm able to think outside the box, beyond standard solutions. A lot of times in science, we get into a particular way of doing things, and we have a hard time thinking outside that box. And so, for example, with all my research, one of the key concepts is low cost. A lot of scientists don't think about low cost, but I do, because I know that we can't make an impact on a global basis unless the energy is cheap. So low cost, I think I have a skill of looking outside the box, but there's a lot of creative people out there, I've learned. But me, I like to be creative in a scientific way.
Excellent. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I know you would hope people would reach out and connect with you who have an interest in your project. How can they learn more about it, and how can they connect with you to collaborate or otherwise help you out?
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for having me on. I love talking about these projects, these important projects, and I would love people to get in contact with me. There's a couple of ways they can do it. You can email me directly at my UVU email address, which is kshurtleff, SHURTLEFF, @uvu.edu. You can go to my personal page on UVU where I have the PowerPoint slides talking about the project. You can download those directly. It's a PDF file. To find that, you can probably supply them with a link.
Yeah, I'll put a link on the show notes page for sure.
Yeah, show notes page, yeah. But you can go to UVU and just say UVU Shurtleff, and my personal profile page will come up. It describes my project, and then you can download some the PowerPoint slides that describe the project in greater detail.
Fantastic. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We really wish you every success in the great work you're doing to solve our energy problems and clean up algal blooms.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate your help in terms of spreading the word. It's an important project.
All righty. Let's do some good.
At Caring Crowd, we believe everyone has the power to make a difference. Through our crowdfunding platform for community health, we empower passionate people to drive real change. Whether you work for a nonprofit organization, volunteer, or want to get involved for the first time, you can post a campaign on Caring Crowd. Join us, because caring is where change begins.
Thank you for listening. Devin Thorpe's mission is to end extreme poverty, improve global health, and mitigate climate change before 2045 by finding and sharing the stories of those who are doing the most good. You can join with other listeners to accelerate Devin's mission by visiting helpdevin.org right now.